And now, from beyond our dimension, this is the JeffMara podcast. Here's Jeff.
My guest is Mary Rodwell, author, lecturer, and internationally recognized as one of Australia's leading researchers in the UFO and Contact phenomena. Mary, welcome back. It's great to have you again.
Jeff, it's an absolute pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
Well, there's probably a lot of people that are meeting you for the first time today. So can we start with how your background as a registered nurse and a hypnotherapist led you in the direction of UFOs?
It's a good question, and I'm going to have to create a synopsis, very brief one for you. First of all, I'd like to say that I've always been interested in the weird and the wonderful, even as a small child. Always trying to understand more about reality, fascinated by the supernatural, space, all this kind of thing. So I've had a natural inclination to curiosity, despite my religious upbringing. As a nurse and then a midwife, I was obviously exposed to what we call, standard medicine, which was very useful because ultimately when I left those professions to have my family, I was invited to learn counseling at a medical practice. And what I was fascinated by was how the connection between emotional health was very much part of, people's problems, if you like. Also, what was interesting was that they had sometimes very unusual experiences. And they would, when they felt relaxed enough with me, they would tell me about some of them. Like, I remember one gentleman saying that his father, who passed on, would often give him messages and talk to him and show him things. And I said to him, "Is it helpful?" And he said, "Absolutely. My dad's been a wonderful support." And I remember questioning that with a priest, because I was still very much in that model, and saying, what do you make of all of that? And he said, "Well, it's all God, Mary," was his response to it. But it opened me up more and more to the world of what we called the multidimensional, the fact that do we live after, do we survive death, all those kinds of things. So reincarnation, all of those kinds of things. And when I had a kind of midlife crisis and persuaded my family to move to Australia, Western Australia. And I had a choice of going back into medicine or staying with counseling. And I decided to stay with counseling. I worked for an organization that dealt with grief and bereavement. And what was fascinating about that was, again, people facing either their mortality, in hospice, or having a huge grief experience, how that changed their perspective on life, how they were seeking answers, did we survive death, all those kind of things, which got me on the track of looking at reincarnation, looking at spiritual issues, looking at religion, all those kinds of things fascinated me. And I read prodigiously on all those kinds of things, and ultimately learned hypnosis because I wanted to see how that could help, which it does in many cases, not just to stop smoking and, phobias and what have you. But what I discovered was people, given the right information to help them go into trance, could start to tap into other lifetimes. And that was fascinating to me because it often helped them with maybe a phobia that they'd had, like a phobia of water, for example, or a phobia of something else, because going on into that depth allowed them to explore the reasoning behind they had a phobia that they couldn't isolate in this present life. And it would often release that fear by revisiting it and what have you. So having said all of that, I got more and more intrigued, read books from Dolores Cannon, for example, who everybody, I think, knows about her wonderful books and hypnosis. I've actually met her and she was a friend. Ultimately, she became a really good friend of mine. But what got me into this side of things was two things, really. One of them was I got invited to join a group to work with my multidimensional awareness. And that was a group that I worked with for 3 years, which enabled you to tap into more of what I would call what some would call clairvoyance, clairaudience, clairsentience, all those kinds of things. And we worked with that awareness in a group, and two of them were clinical psychologists. So, I was in good company. I often thought, well, if this is not tangible and not real, I'm in good company because I've got some real professionals here doing the same thing as me. And we did everything, tapping into our intuition and our abilities and what have you, and having what I believe was accessing our higher self, our superconscious self, and to other intelligences. Not many people have known that's what I was doing. It wasn't something I put out there. And as I was doing that, I had a gentleman come to see me who said, Mary, I've heard you're open-minded for this. There's no support groups. There's no way to get help. They all think you're crazy. And talked about his interactions on board craft, waking up with marks on his body, shaved areas. And his partner was having experiences. The children were having experiences. And he said, can you help? And I had little knowledge of it at the time, except for synchronously, a few weeks literally prior to this, I'd picked up two books, because any book on weird and wonderful I would buy. And one of them was Dr. John Mack, the Harvard professor of psychiatry, who wrote the book Abduction, Human Encounters with Aliens, doing all the psychological testing. He accepted that this was a reality for them. He had no question about that. And he wrote a second book, Passport to the Cosmos, validating hypnotic regression and the information that was coming through people who had had experiences. So a pretty credible book, coming from that source. And the other one was Communion by Whitley Strieber, who talked experientially about his own experiences. And those were the two books that I was fascinated to read, thought it was very, very rare, but how fascinating. And then in through my door walks this gentleman telling me he's had these experiences, which was very valuable, because although I absolutely believed him, when someone's being authentic, when somebody's having something very real happen to them, you can't mistake it. But having that as background, then I got intrigued. And what intrigued me more than anything with this, Jeff, was the fact that it wasn't just him having the experiences, it was his partner and it was the kids. So here was a family affair, and he said, people won't come to the house because they think it's demons. And can you help? Well, all I could do at the time was support what was actually going on, and just having someone listen, and someone who isn't mocking or deriding the experience, and walking along with them was at the time very valuable. To get to the point where I am now, within a couple of years of that, I met a social worker who's having experiences, and we started a support group. Very first ever in Perth. 12 people turned up, and we realized this wasn't maybe as rare as we thought it was. And from that, I ended up creating a CERN in 1997, because I really wanted to offer professional help as a professional counselor and hypnotherapist, and a support person that had a little bit, not a great deal of knowledge, but a little bit of knowledge of this reality. And that's really how a CERN was born.
For those who don't know, what is a CERN?
Australian Close Encounter Resource Network was what I was guided to create, because people didn't always want to go to other agencies because of their lack of knowledge of this experience. And because of the truth embargo, it was often misinterpreted as psychotic or a phobia of some kind. And well, as we've already discussed, and I've discussed in many, many interviews, is that whole families have this experience. This is not just one person. And that in itself validates the reality of it, even if you find it difficult to believe that whole families have these experiences. I've worked with 3,500 families, children globally that have all had similar experiences. So for me, it's the truth embargo that's the problem, because we're not being told the truth. And I think that is without doubt.
Are you aware of Professor David Jacobs' work?
I've met him.
You've met him. What are
I have.
Have you had cases similar to his?
I've had cases, lots of different cases, where they've had a different perspective on what this is all about. I have some issues with that, in the sense of it. A lot depends on how you facilitate hypnosis and whether or not you're objective or not. And that is really important, because I know that were certain researchers, very well-known ones, and I won't name them, that told me that they were absolutely certain that people were being manipulated, and they didn't believe it, even when it was positive experiences. Even when we did our survey with the Dr. Edgar Mitchell Free Foundation and found out of 4,200 people, 50% of them had healing experiences on board craft. Now, that in itself gives you a bit more of an agenda behind these experiences, particularly as we found also with that 4,200 people in our survey in the book Beyond UFOs, that 85% had a psycho-spiritual transformation. That doesn't echo with some of the data that comes from certain researchers that believe it's all a dark agenda. I am not finding that.
Do you think it would be easy for the hypnotherapist to lead the client in a direction they want them to go?
I think it's very possible to do so, especially if they respect you as a therapist. And the problem is really about how you ask the questions. And it's really important not to lead them in any way whatsoever. And to give you an example of that, you can have a therapist that may say, right, you're on the craft now. I want you to look at the beings. Which ones do you think are not very nice, or whatever? Immediately you're leading them. When in fact, what you should be saying is, I want you to look around. Tell me what you see. Where it's completely open-ended. There is no reference to positive, negative, or anything else. And you're waiting for them. And tell me if any of them are familiar, is something I often ask. And they may say, oh, well, the one right in front of me is very familiar. And then you take it like that. So for me, it's very much the way you ask questions. And even, as I say, what I found from very well-known researchers, some of them no longer with us, have told me that they believe that anything that is positive that comes from these experiences is actually manipulation. So they were absolutely convinced, even when it came out as being very positive, that there was a reason behind that and it was manipulation. So I don't agree with that, because these people, in many cases, if we've got 85% of people who have a psycho-spiritual transformation after their experiences, that's telling you an agenda. An agenda is that it's waking people up. And when I say positive, spiritual awakening, they completely change the way that they want to live. They often change their lifestyle, lose interest in materialistic values. Many of them want to do positive things for humanity. Many of them say, I don't even want to kill an ant. I can't step on an ant any longer, because of their whole way of living and perspective has changed in extremely positive ways. That's giving you information about what is actually happening through these interactions.
What are some of the most recurring themes and patterns that you have seen?
Well, there's quite a few. When somebody writes to me, I usually send them my questionnaire, and it's not your standard questionnaire, apart from, saying, have you seen UFOs or whatever, or have you had missing time or whatever. There are certain other themes, like, I don't feel like I belong. This isn't home. I feel like I've been adopted. I don't understand how we live on this planet. I think people are very aggressive. I feel like I've got a mission or a purpose. They will say, I think I have abilities that other people don't have. Many of them will explain that they have had telepathic abilities, for example, as part of their, as a child and whatever. Often the problem has been that they've said, look, I don't have much memory as a child, for example, but they will maybe mention that they've been aware of a light coming through the window and presences around them and going somewhere. They're often, as much as it is that they remember, or they have a missing time episode where they say, me and my family, we went to see grandma and we should have only taken, an hour to get there, and we were late by 3 hours, and we remember seeing this bright light in the sky or whatever, which is an indicator not just of one interaction, by the way. When you take them into an altered state, often they'll realize that that interaction's been happening all their lives, and they haven't remembered it, but they have remembered that they feel connected to the stars. They say, my family, my home is somewhere out there and I don't really like it down here. Very common themes. So there's those patterns I've put into a questionnaire, like, do you feel presences around you? Do you see orbs of light or whatever? All those kinds of things. And it's not going to satisfy someone who wants all three-dimensional information like pictures of craft or whatever. But what is effective and real is how it's changed by sighting a craft, how it's changed their perspective and their reality. And often there's an interaction just by sighting a craft. You don't realize it, but there's been an interaction in many cases because it's been an instant download or whatever. But the reality that I find that is very compelling is how people are changed by these experiences and have what I call downloads. And these downloads may be information they've not consciously learnt, scientific information, information about the past, information about other planets and what have you that they haven't consciously learnt. They may start to draw unusual symbols, write strange scripts, and some of them will articulate strange languages we call star languages. And this isn't just adults. This is children that actually do the same thing. And this is why it's fascinated me that, children that have not been front loaded, the parents say, we've never mentioned any of this. And yet they're talking about going and being on spaceships and learning things on spaceships and talking about things that they shouldn't have any understanding of, like going to other planets and going through portals or wormholes. And these are 6, 7, and 8-year-old children. So for me, what's fascinating is that this reality is not rare at all, but is happening, I believe, across the planet. Only not everybody understands what it is they're experiencing.
How do you differentiate between a genuine experience versus something else?
What do you mean by something else?
If they're fabricating something, or maybe they're having some other problem in their lives?
It doesn't happen very often that someone I'm questioning whether or not what they're experiencing is their reality, because most of the time, people that contact me are not doing it for any fame or glory or any other reason. They've got nothing to gain, and I'm not paying them for telling me whatever their story is. So that in itself is what would be the motivation of sharing a story when you're not going to get any publicity and you're not going to get any monetary reward other than you're getting someone listen to your fabrication. There's not a lot of people that would bother to do that. And I said that to, been asked that question by, mainstream sometimes. And I said, would you travel from another country to go and see this lady and to tell them a fantasy, spending all that money, and who's not going to make you famous and who's not going to give you any money for it? Would you do that? And they're saying, no, I don't think so. Exactly. What I do see is some people very confused that haven't been listened to, and it has disturbed them and made them unwell because they, with the stresses of that and the stresses of their life have sometimes compromised their experience in the sense that they've lost a sense of balance with it. And that's a different kind of thing. And I can usually tell very quickly if someone really should just focus on their 3D life and not get too caught up in the other part of it, because sometimes that leaves them very confused and very unhappy or bewildered, and they can't deal with it. So, it's very important if someone's exploring this, they're in a good place to explore it, because it's enough in itself without having everyday issues going on behind the scenes that will make it even more stressful.
Why do you think people get downloads when a lot of the times they're either not aware of it or unable to access them?
That's a good question. I think there's the purpose of some of them certainly is because in some way it activates them in some way and activates others that hear it as well. It's like a frequency. And I think some of those that speak the star languages and these symbols, there's a frequency with that is making a difference to them energetically or through their DNA. My theory is the ones they can't decode. And I'll quote a young lady many years ago that said to me, Mary, when you see a script, which is maybe one symbol, she said, multidimensionally, that's like filling a room of encyclopedias. It's a compressed program of information. So I thought to myself, well, that's all fascinating and doesn't surprise me, because I think there's something very profound happening to the planet right now. And I think it all links to DNA. And the reason that I say that, and I, as an ex-nurse, I've always wanted to know the tangible 3D validation of anything that's going on, if possible, because that's really important to ground the information and for people to validate it, is that we only use a small portion of our DNA. Some say 5 or 10%, we understand what it does, but the rest of it is, they used to call it junk litter. They still don't know what its purpose is and whatever. I don't believe that it's junk in that sense. I think we just haven't yet accessed it for one reason or another. And to give you an example of what I mean is, I think that what's happening as people get activated by these frequencies, it opens up more of their DNA opens up more of their awareness, which is like activating this dormant DNA. And I believe that ultimately what is happening is these frequencies are activating more and more of our human DNA for us to realize not only who we are and what we are, but our abilities as well. Because that's what I'm seeing happening when people are exposed to some of these frequencies. They find themselves, I remember I was giving a presentation in a town not too far from where I live now, and there was a nurse in the audience, and I was showing some of the scripts and some of the languages and what have you. And this nurse said, as soon as I saw that and heard that language, she said, I found myself writing this strange script. Right after the presentation, she found herself writing this strange script. So I know the evidence there is something is being activated through these downloads and whatever. And the way that I look at it, and it's only a hypothesis, it's just me doing my wondering, as I do a lot of, well, what's the purpose of this? And I thought the reason that some of these downloads are there as programs is, as we become more activated and more aware, we're going to need new software to understand our reality. And that maybe is the software to understand the reality. There's a film that's been out a number of years called Lucy. And I don't know how many people have actually seen it, but in that particular film, the lady is she's given a drug to smuggle to another country that in her abdomen, but it's a very unusual drug. And this drug actually, as it bursts in her abdomen and starts to activate her DNA, and gradually she becomes more and more multidimensionally aware, more expansive, to the point of becoming light. And although the story itself, on one hand, is not the best story, on another, it's an indicator of what perhaps is going on with these symbols and these codes that are coming down. Is they're there as part of, some of it as activators, but some of it actually as software for the new activated human that I believe we're all going to become part of as our consciousness, as we awaken to more of who we are. I don't know, it's a hypothesis, but we would need extra help to understand a greater reality. If that's gradually, as we're gradually opening up to more of our abilities, we're going to need help to manage that reality in a way that we can still stabilize. But that's just my theory.
It sounds like to me that their agenda is that they're here to help us. And if so, what do you think the end game is?
That's a good question, Jeff. I think the end game is for us to join the galactic community as, if you like, part of that those intelligences that have been supporting this awakening of humanity for eons. Because, one of the interesting things is that there have been a number of those that have told or shared the fact, and many intuitives have also said this, that we may be, we're a hybrid species, that there may be at least 12 different intelligences that have been part of the creation of Homo sapiens sapiens, and that they've been monitoring our progress all through the centuries, to a point where they hope that we will get enough spiritual awareness and understanding and higher consciousness that we can actually join the galactic community. And we're very close to space travel. Some say we've already conquered that and we're not told about it, but we're very close to that now. So we've got to be in of a consciousness that can interact with these intelligences in a spiritual way that isn't aggressive, that isn't a warrior-like, as we are still on this planet. And I think that when we learnt and created nuclear weapons and what have you, there was a big concern by many of them. And we know that there have been sightings over military bases where the nuclear capability has been deprogrammed and switched off because that is dangerous. I think that they see us to a certain extent as a 3-year-old with a loaded gun, not knowing that it can kill. And they're trying to rapidly upgrade our awareness and our consciousness so that we can join them as a galactic species in the right spiritual awareness and understanding. And this is what they're doing now. They're upgrading our awareness, our spirituality, to activate the higher part of the soul. And what is interesting with all of that is there's some say, well, how are they helping us? And one of them, I believe, is that they are using some of their own and incarnating them into human form. And this is what we call the star seeds, because many of them are aware of their galactic origins. You know, they'll say, well, I'm actually connected to the Pleiades, or I'm connected to Arcturus or Andromeda, or I'm a Lyran or whatever. And even children will mention that they've come from somewhere else to help this planet upgrade into a cosmic part of the community. So the end game is for us to join the galactic community, the cosmic community, I believe.
Sometimes when you're regressing people, you're basically having a conversation with ETs through the client laying on the couch. Can you share with us some of the most fascinating conversations you've had with them?
Well, one, you'll all know Peter Slattery, who had an experience where he'd had a contact experience many, many years ago, and it was his first filmed, if you like, regression. He'd never had it been regressed before. He didn't know what to expect and whatever. And I actually showed as a demonstration of how this can happen, where somebody's consciousness is, if you like, hijacked by one of their guides, or I call them spiritual support team, and taking him to an experience where this being then started to talk about Peter's purpose, and that in fact and Peter will probably laugh when they were saying Pete's very stubborn and he's got to listen to us and what have you as well. But many of the conversations are about the role that this individual has to play. When they talk about in the third person, you know, they'll say they've got to realize that what is happening is real, that they have a job they've come here with a mandate, a mission, and it's really important they start that mission now and listen to us, and that we're helping them to understand that mission and what it involves. So in many cases, it's like that it's what I would call their spiritual support team, whether you want to call that their guardian angel, spirit guide, gatekeeper, or whatever. And it seems that everybody, and this has come through many, many times, everybody has them, even if you're not consciously aware of them. I often say to people, do you sometimes get information in your head that you haven't consciously learned, and it's just there and it's just right? And they're saying yes all the time. Or something will come into your head and guide you. Like your intuition will guide you to something, or you'll get a resonance to information that comes in. I said sometimes that feels like what that people call their higher self, their inner wisdom, or super conscious. But sometimes it feels like it's come from another presence, a loving, caring presence. So what does happen sometimes, if someone's in that relaxed space, they allow that one of those presences to actually come through. And I always remember a wonderful lady, she's no longer with us, and very few go somnambulistic, which means that they lose their awareness completely and are not aware of anything that they've said in the hypnosis at all. And this lady was actually making these chirping sounds during I was asking questions, and she was making these chirping sounds like she's having a conversation. And those are very similar to having a conversation with the mantis beings, which is a kind of chirping sound. And when she came out of it, I always remember her denial, because I said, she said, well, what happened? I don't remember anything. And I said, well, do you want to listen to some of it? And she was hearing her making these chirping sounds. She says, what on earth's that? She says, that's weird, and what have you. I said, you're having a conversation with the mantis beings. I said, I don't know what the conversation was, but she went into complete denial. For ages. She wouldn't accept that that was what was actually happening. So when people think that it's made up and what have you, believe me, this often absolutely transforms people's understanding, listening to them themselves and their connection to and a conversation they might have. Because the other thing I will add here, Jeff, is that when somebody's in the on the craft and they're seeing around them and they're seeing the beings around them, and they may see one particular being, and I'll say, is there any familiar to you? Because that means they've been on the craft before, if there is. And they'll say, yes, the one right in front of me to the right. And I'll say, well, ask that being, how many times have they picked you up? And the person will reel off, they're telling me when I was 2, 5, 7, 10, whatever, and will reel off the ages they've been picked up. And I'll say, what other questions would you like to ask them? And they may say, what are you doing it for? Or why are you doing it? And they will get an answer, which is, it's a medical procedure, or we're checking up on you, or whatever. And I will say to them, have you got it? Is there anything else you want to ask? And they can actually have a conversation in trance with the questions that they may have always wondered about, with an intelligence in that space. And that's been very valuable, because not only is it proving to them that they were on board craft, but actually their interaction with the beings themselves and what was behind it. And sometimes they find out they're a hybrid, that one of the beings on board craft has been part of their DNA makeup, so that that they've actually been born with that part of the DNA. And that's why some of them will say, I think I'm a hybrid, or I feel I'm a hybrid, because there's an innate knowing. So for me, it's helping the client connect the dots in the way that makes the most sense to them.
After regressing thousands of people and speaking with ETs indirectly, have you started having spirit experiences yourself?
Well, ever since I joined the group many years ago, I spent 3 years with that group, and we did virtually everything that you talk about in a metaphysical perspective, in terms of working with different intelligences. You got to know how to tune into different intelligences, and to validate them as well. So for me, I've had that kind of experience many, many times, where I've had information downloads, where I've been given information when I've needed it, not only for my own personal use, but for creating a CERN, to writing my books. And what was fascinating is, if I was writing chapters, for example, in Awakening, to start with, I would do a chapter maybe on, I don't know, on fear or something. And all the phone calls that I would be making or hearing from would be all about the fear. It's like it was set up. And I believe that I've been set up or helped by these intelligences to be the best resource I could be through that connection. And if I get information from someone that I'm interested in, I can actually say, well, tell me more about it. And I will get a communication saying, well, this is what you need to do, or this is what you need to look at. And that's been invaluable, because when I do hypnosis and I need to know what questions to ask, I might get something completely out the blue come into my head saying, you need to ask this question. And that will be the one that's the most valuable to that person. Even in a presentation, I will find myself going off script, because I will get something come through, and the words will just come out my mouth. Everyone can do this, though, Jeff. This is what I really want to say, is that I didn't believe that I could ever do any of this, because I felt I was far too normal and quite grounded. But what I found was, everybody has the ability to do this. And what's been activated by these intelligences, I believe, is they're activating people to access their abilities even if they were told, when they were younger that it was not real, which shuts them down. Many of them have been activated again to say, yes, you can do this, because otherwise you're going around the world in the 3D reality with one eye open and the other one closed, because you need your multidimensional to explain your 3D physical. And so for many people, they're going around blind or semi-blind. And now what's happening is that people are waking up to the multidimensional, which is actually helping them understand the physical. So once you tap into that intuition, that sensing, that knowing, that feeling, you may get visions, you may not, you may get information, downloads or whatever, but one way or another, there's a part of you, when it's ready, will open up to this part of yourself that has the answers to help you understand more of what's going on in the physical. And that's what's happening, and why people are feeling so empowered now, because they're accessing more of the understanding they need to make sense of their 3D world.
When you say people can do this themselves, do you mean by accessing these parts of themselves, or they're able to self-regress?
Oh, some people, it is difficult to self-regress because you're trying to do two things, and that's why a facilitator to take somebody into an experience is very useful, because then the person can focus on what the subconscious is showing them without actually trying to facilitate it at the same time, even though they may get images or whatever. But in terms of accessing your multidimensional, I've shown hundreds of people how to do it. And it's just knowing how to access it and understand how it happens, or the process of how it happens. Because we all can access our intuition. We all get knowings, we all get feelings, we all get senses of things. It's how do you put that together to have confidence in it? And what I do is a process which shows them how to know the difference between what's imagination and what's multidimensional information. And it's actually very, very obvious, the difference, once you understand how it all works, which is what I needed to do to prove to myself that I wasn't leading myself down the garden path, and fantasizing things. I had experiences that I couldn't have possibly imagined. And I knew that it was a reality. For example, with 3D, you think before you speak. In multidimensional, you speak before you think. So you're cutting out the logical. So for a lot of people, when they get something instantly, that's usually multidimensional information. How do you know that's not imagination? Well, that's very easy, because if something is real, like I say to people, think of your bedroom in your mind's eye, you know where the bed is, you know where the window is, you know where the door is, because it's real and it's your bedroom. If I said, create a bedroom or imagine one, you'd have to think to create it. You'd have to think, well, how big would the room be? Where would I put the bed? Where would I put the window? What color would the walls be? Imagination requires thought. When you get multidimensional information, it's instant. It's in your head before you've had a chance to even think, well, where did that come from? Oh, that's very wise. Oh, I didn't realize I was so clever, or whatever. That's multidimensional. Where does it come from is the next question. Well, sometimes it's your multidimensional higher self, but it could also be one of those presences, whether you call them your guardian angel or you call them your spirit guide or whatever, is planting data in your head, or one of these extraterrestrials are planting information there, getting you to take notice. So once you realize that, you can expand on that and work with it, so that ultimately you can have conversations with those intelligent, once you isolate who they are.
It sounds like to me that some people deny or don't believe what came up during their session. Why is that?
Because it's so extraordinary in many cases to believe that they've been shown maybe how to fly a ship, a craft. That can't be me. Or I remember, although she didn't disbelieve this, I remember a lady telling me that she was on board craft, but she was in the form of a Zeta, a grey, and she was a scientist. And she said, and I'm helping them with their science program. So I said, well, where's your human body? And she said, oh, to one side over there. She sort of pointed to where she thought her human body was. And I said, well, how do you get out of the Zeta form, the grey form, back to your human body? And she described a ball of light leaving the Zeta form and reanimating a human body. Now, for her, she accepted that. But you try and tell somebody who may be very programmed into 3D, experiencing that and saying, well, how do you go with that? Oh, that's I can't, that doesn't make any sense to me or whatever. So sometimes they'll come and I've often said to them, because somebody will say, well, it's so extraordinary. And I said, well, would you in your wildest imaginings have created that? And they would say to me, well, not in my wildest imaginings. Well, then what are you going to say? Are you going to accept that that's what your subconscious is showing you? And it may take them weeks or even months sometimes to accept fully what they've been shown and what they've heard. And that's why I always record, of course, because it takes sometimes somebody quite a while to assimilate that this is another part of their reality, until in many cases they gradually accept that that may be something they've experienced.
Is it often that people don't remember the regression and so afterwards you have to sit and tell them, or do you just play the recording for them?
As a debriefer, Jeff, I will, if they don't remember anything, I will go over a certain amount of the regression and talk with them about it to help them debrief and to understand. But I said that the most important is for them to sit quietly, because I will always send them the recording and say, you need to sit quietly and listen to that and see how it feels and resonates with you. And it can be quite some months before they fully integrate what they've heard. But in many cases, it starts to make sense. It's like part of them resonates to it as well. But it can be quite extraordinary. Some of the experience. I always remember this lovely gentleman in his 60s, and he'd gone back to being on board craft with, I think it was mantis beings, the mantis looking like beings. And he went right back to a 7-year-old language, and he was telling them off for taking his sandals off and saying, you can't take my sandals off. And he was talking like a little 7-year-old. And it was really quite difficult for me to keep a straight face, even though he couldn't see because he'd got his eyes, because he didn't remember any of it afterwards, that he'd been berating these mantis beings for taking off his sandals because they had no right to take his sandals off. And it was quite hilarious.
For someone who's skeptical but open-minded, what first steps should they take if they want to explore this field?
I think the first thing is to know and understand and get validated the tangible side of this, which is, which is what's happening with disclosure. In other words, realizing that we've been visited all through our history, to understand, the nature of who we are as a hybrid species, to actually get the more tangible side of this reality, affirming that it's going on, because ultimately we need that to build. And it was important to me, if people are saying this, where is the evidence that I can find and there are hundreds of stories saying the same thing. Is also one of the reasons I send the questionnaire, is because it's got patterns of experience in it that I've seen time and time and time again. This helps people to actually validate their own experiences. And I always remember this 60-year-old Australian man who rang me up, and he said to me, I've had extraordinary experiences. I don't expect anyone else will really understand them, and they'll probably think, they'll probably laugh and think this is funny or whatever. And I said, well, I'm going to send you my questionnaire. Tell me how you go with it. I sent him the questionnaire. Within a couple of days, I got a phone call back from him, and he was in tears. And he said to me, how do you know about my life? Because there were all the patterns of so many. And that's what I mean, is that initially, the biggest thing for most is this real? And if it is real, why me? What's it all about? Where is it taking me? Very standard questions. So for anyone that's open-minded, first of all, look at the whistleblower evidence of the truth and embargo to begin with. Look at our history, the fact we're not told the truth about our origins, all of the lies that are out there about what is supposed to be our history, conventional history, everything has been compromised. You can start, once you start looking for it, you can see it. So take that to start with, and then start listening to the numerous stories time and time again. There are so many experiences writing about their accounts now, their stories with their, with amazing experiences and what have you, right across the board. Then you can start seeing the patterns and the reason that we absolutely are not alone, and we've never been alone, and we've been visited by numerous civilizations. What is fascinating is we don't even know how many. Many of them are walking amongst us. Charles Hall talks about the tall whites that have been there in Area 51 for however long. I've met Charles and his wife, and his story. Those kinds of stories are very tangible. They're very, very grounded stories in terms of its reality. And then you need to understand that that many people are having experiences where they're out of body going on board craft. It's not all physical. And that's where consciousness is being changed as well. So it's getting from physical to the multidimensional. And the multidimensional is what we're looking at is consciousness itself. And what is consciousness? And the important thing I'd like to add to that, Jeff, is it isn't necessarily through a UFO contact experience. It may happen to you that you communicate with these intelligences after a near-death experience or an out-of-body experience or a shamanic experience, for example, or you are just a natural medium and you're connecting to spirits and intelligences as well. So it's not just through one avenue that we connect to these intelligences. It's in numerous ways when we open up to our more multidimensional nature.
Have you had any personal recent experiences spiritually that you could share with us?
Well, in terms of seeing craft, I've seen plenty of those over the years. In fact, if you Google my house in Agnes Water, somebody told me there was a UFO that's captured by Google over the house. I've had more than anything, it's more like communication, downloads. When I work with someone, I'm working with them both with my logical 3D self, but also through my connections. So if I need to if there's extra information that I need after I've heard someone's story, I can access that if needed to help someone with their own experiences. So I'm doing it as a natural part of my everyday life, just like most who are communicating, whether they're mediums, clairvoyance, clairaudience, or abilities and whatever. It's a natural part of who I am now. I don't say, well, it's this or it's that. It's me on a 3D level, but me on a multidimensional level. And so I'm guided all the time with where I need to go and what I need to do. So it's not separate and it's not orchestrated. They tell me when I need to know information. It may even happen in a presentation where I'm chatting away and then something will come in my head that I need to say. And I think, okay, that needs to be put out there. And then I find out the reason for it because somebody in the audience has mentioned something that I've just been given. So I'm working with what I believe are spiritual intelligences that are supporting the journey of awakening.
Do you think that we should have all the natural clairs as our normal abilities and they just need to be turned on?
I think we are all born with exactly those abilities. I think the problem has been is that we've been programmed out of them by many different sources. And often what needs to happen or does happen at some point has been, and I think it's a soul decision that, I don't know, a certain age, something will happen to get you to open up to your abilities again. And I think it's just about timing for each soul. Everyone is different. But absolutely, it's innate in all of us.
It appears to me that contact is increasing globally. Do you see anything in your regressions that confirm that? And if so, why do you think it's happening?
Oh, so many regressions where the individual finds out that they're connected to different star systems. Even the children will talk about this. It's like there's been a cosmic call out to souls all over the universes, saying, who's prepared to come to planet Earth because they're at an important point in their consciousness and their activation and awakening? Who's going to bring their skills to do that? And that's what I think has been why so many people don't feel like they belong here, that they feel like they belong somewhere else, and this isn't home. And when some of the children will talk about it. I was talking to a 7-year-old little girl who believes she's a hybrid, part blue avian, part human, speaks star language. And she was saying that she helps to activate healing in other people through the frequencies and what have you. There was a 10-year-old, and I've spoken about him a number of times, where he remembers being a blue being from another planet, coming to this planet for the first time. He said his mum's been to the planet many times, so she's helped him learn to be human. And he said he's a center seed. He connects to the center of the planet. He's going to help with all the pollution on the planet. So they have mandates. They know what their mandates are, and they talk about them. And these are, young children, as well as, the teenagers and the older generations that also have mandates. Many of them have been going along doing the human thing until a certain point where they've said, now it's my time to get on with what I've come here to do. And that's what gives me hope for the planet, because I don't believe all these wonderful star seeds have incarnated for a waste of time. I believe they have come because they know they can make a difference. And I think what we're experiencing now is that shift and that awakening.
I think the puzzle is that if we come here with these mandates or soul contracts or whatever people want to call them, we come here with amnesia as well, and we can't remember them. So how are we supposed to fulfill these contracts?
I think the awakening for the individual happens through a number of ways. For somebody, they may awaken up to their mandate through a near-death experience. Somebody else may wake up through a shamanic experience, for example. Somebody else through learning something like Reiki or whatever will access it. So it really depends on the soul, their life story, their family, their work. Many have been activated in the last few years due to what's happening on the planet, and the way things have been managed has been a time for a lot of people to self-reflect and to realize that there's something bigger here that's going on, and waking people up to what's really happening on the planet and what their part is in it as well. So I think it's a bit of a personal soul mandate, but they're waking up to who they are and what they are through a number of different ways.
What advice do you give to adults who believe that they are star seeds awakening later in life?
Well, it's a good one, because I'm later in life as well, although I think, I was activated a little bit over 30 years ago now, I suppose, to my awareness, if you like, or whatever. Many of them in their 70s, and I've met even some in their 80s, saying, well, it's all very well. I'm aware. I've woke up to my experiences and whatever, but isn't it a bit late now for me to do anything? And I say, well, there's a reason why us older folks are aware of this, because we're going to create the bridge from the old to the new, because we've experienced, the old ways and what have you, and we're going to be helping to lead people across that bridge into the new humanity, the new way of living and whatever. And so I don't think our age is going to make a difference, because we have the experience. We have the life experience of I look back, and my parents died about 20 years ago now, and I remember thinking recently they wouldn't have made any sense of the reality now and the way that we operate now compared to 20 or 30 years ago. And I think that what we're doing is we're helping those that are still on that transit between the 3D reality and their multidimensional activation. We're creating the bridge, and we're needed for that. And it's the older folks that can do it, because we've experienced both, whereas the young ones are already there.
Do you feel that something big is going to happen soon? Just like a general feeling in that way?
Absolutely. And what's come through with many of my clients over the years, in recent years particularly, is a sense of anticipation, a sense of knowing something major is going to create a shift of some kind in terms of human consciousness. And they've got lots of different theories about what that might be. But without question, it's going to happen, or they feel it's going to happen sooner rather than later. And I've tried to access that as well. And I've basically been shut down and told, you can't possibly work out what this is, Mary, so don't even try. It's like you're just gonna have to wait and see. Which is frustrating because every now and again you want to see what the last page of the book says, but you're still in the middle of it all and whatever. But I think it's important that we experience it as we go along rather than have forewarning. But the sense, sometimes people are very anxious and feel a sense of anxiety or stress around it. But I said, look, if you've undertaken to be on this planet at this time with your awareness and your abilities, because you know that you can deal with it. Otherwise, you wouldn't have bothered to incarnate. Why would you bother, if you couldn't deal with it? And I'm of the firm belief that we're born with all the tools we need to get us through this life, even though the consensus we're often programmed to believe we're no good at anything, that we need pieces of paper and everyone knows more than us, which of course isn't true. We're our own guru, our own student, we have everything we need once we trust that. But it's trusting it, isn't it?
Yeah. Do you think that we're going to have full open disclosure anytime soon and they'll be walking among us?
I think so. I think that it will happen. And I think it's not because the governments want it as full on as that. I think they'll still try and play their own little game. But I think there's too many people that are owning their experiences now. And I believe disclosure is going to happen from the ground up, that more and more people are going to say, this is my reality, this is my experience, writing books and what have you. But I do think they're coming and they're going to get us to wake up finally to the real truth of who we are and what we are and what we're connected to, because it's time. And I believe all these star seeds, especially the younger ones who have come to teach us, more about what our capabilities are, haven't come in for a waste of time.
If you watch TV shows like Ancient Aliens, you will
Yeah.
notice that there are a lot of ancient structures on the planet that don't appear to be built by humans, at least entirely by themselves. Have you ever had a client that discussed being involved with any of these ancient structures?
Yes, there have been some that have mentioned that they've come from other planetary systems and been involved in that. And I always remember one client many years ago who came in as one of the gods, not a particularly nice one, as actually, who basically took over a particular civilization and basically ruled them. And he remembers doing that and actually not being very nice about it either. He was one of the less loving gods, as it were, which was quite fascinating. I've also met some of the children who have mentioned, as well as some adults, who talk about Atlantis, talk about Lemuria, and we mentioned Leah Capitelli, who was in Atlantis at the same time apparently I was as well. So I think many of us have been here before in ancient civilizations, and we've been involved in some of that. And I think that what's fascinating was one young man who I wrote about in The New Human, who was 9 years old, explaining to me the reason he goes to sacred sites is because in each sacred site he gets downloads from being in that particular site, and information. And he mentioned something about the pyramids. He said, what needs to happen there is the pyramids were surrounded by water. Anyway, he said that they needed to be surrounded by water and the right consciousness for you to access what the pyramids could actually do. He was very aware of how they all got activated as well. So what's fascinating, I always, years and years ago, there was a story of a young man of 5 whose mother was telling him a story about the pyramids and how hundreds of people slaves were pulling all the stones to build the pyramid. And he got very angry with her. And he said, Mum, that's not true. He said, because I was there. And he said, and they changed the density structure of objects, large and small, and they levitated them into place. So she was actually told how they actually built the pyramids. So, it's coming through. Lots of little snippets like that give you an idea of what's actually been our true history, if you like.
Have you ever had any of your colleagues regress you? And if so, what came up?
Well, I've had 2. one very early on when I wasn't even sure about any of this. And so they were very human in terms of their what I experienced. One was as a Roman soldier, where I ended up in Britain and getting stabbed in the back in Hadrian's Wall, which was interesting. I called them the barbarians, I used terminology I never use, which was interesting to me. And two other, one in France and one in Italy. But the one that I was many years later, a beautiful lady who's no longer with us, and looking at the connection I had with some of my colleagues and what have you. And what was interesting was it wasn't what I expected. I ended up seeing myself going to a planet that was pure energy. It was like a colored ball of wool. You know, when you get that ball of wool with lots of different colors in it. And it was like they were all energy streams in this planet. And I was taken down one energy stream, and I met some of the colleagues that I know in real life, only they were then as souls, and they were saying, we're just reminding you of what we're going to be doing when we all meet together on planet Earth. And they were all telling me, it was like 10 years before I actually met them. And they'd all sort of introduced themselves to me. But I always remembered the planet being just a ball of different frequencies and energy, which I'd never seen anything like that before. And primarily it was like we were introducing ourselves as souls to say that we've all got something to do when we get to planet Earth. And that's about all it was, really, was just showing me something very, very different, and the soul connection to different individuals.
A few of my near-death experiencers have gone to another planet. And the most popular planet that these people go to is what they call the water planet, where everyone is some kind of aquatic-like being. Have you ever come across that in your work?
Yes, numerous times, actually. Some have connected to cetaceans. Interestingly, well, there's two things that come to mind. Is a young 8-year-old that said that she's part water being, part human, and that when she and comes from a water planet, and she said, when I look in the mirror, I'm seeing my water being rather than my human. And she explained that she had the ability that when music was played, she could not only feel the music, but she could feel the frequency of the music, and it took her to the person who created the music and their motivation behind it. So she got a kind of multidimensional understanding of the frequencies of music, which was quite fascinating for an 8-year-old to explain that to me. But one other interesting fact was I was regressing one gentleman, he's no longer with us as well now, and he said, I'm at Atlantis. He said, but I'm a dolphin. So he was experiencing Atlantis as a cetacean, which was quite fascinating. So again, I suppose what it does, Jeff, more than anything, is there is so much we don't know, and you don't know what you don't know, is what I say, because ultimately some of this really stretches people's understanding of what reality is, and yet why not? That's my answer to that, is why not have, these kinds of understanding that reality is so much more, the greater reality is so much greater than we could possibly imagine.
You spoke about Dolores Cannon, and she spoke about NPCs, non-player characters being on the planet, or I think she calls them background people.
Yeah.
Have you experienced any of that in your regressions in any way?
No, nothing that's come up that suggests that. I mean, nothing surprises me. So, the fact that we may, the way that we create reality. I mean, I've often wondered, to be honest, when we talked about science fiction and Star Trek and all the rest of it. And I've often wondered as a soul, maybe, what we've done is create a holodeck, which we call reality. And we're saying, right, we're going to project ourselves into this particular time period and what have you, and have an experience. And we're the creators of that. Who knows? I mean, nothing's off the table as far as I'm concerned, because the more you learn, the more you don't know. So as far as I'm concerned, what we're doing really on this planet in terms of reality is we're just connecting the dots, and we're trying to make sense of what reality is and what we're here for and what it's all about. And that may be the case, that we're co-creators with other intelligences of this reality. I mean, I don't know.
I've had a couple guests, either through near-death experience or astral traveling, wake up in a pod, basically, kind of like being in a matrix.
Well, they do say that, that was a documentary, didn't they? The Matrix. And it wouldn't surprise me. Nothing surprises me now. So the way that I look at it is that I'm led to what I need to learn and grow with, and not to really shut something down just because it makes me fearful or scared, that it's being shown to me for a reason, and it's helping me understand more of who we are and what we are. And I believe we're all on a spiritual journey, which is challenging all our values and our ethics and our capacity to love and to care and to be authentic.
Isn't one of the biggest UFO cases in Australia where a UFO landed at a high school?
Oh, Westall 66, yes. That's just outside Melbourne. And it was about, I think, 200 children, from what I recall, saw this craft land, and some of the teachers, and there was a big, again, cover up over it, and I think the teachers were threatened, and the headmaster as well, that if they talked about it, there was going to be trouble. So everyone was told they can't talk about it, and all evidence that came from the news was also taken, went missing, and what have you. But of course, we've had other cases in other parts of the world. There was the one in Zimbabwe where they had, which Dr. John Mack investigated, again, a group of school children, and sighting a craft and seeing the beings. And now they're all adults saying, there was messages to do with taking care of the planet and what have you. The Solomon Islands, I think there was Reverend Gill and the children there in the Solomon Islands, and they had a similar kind of experience. And I think there's been a number actually in the US as well. So children seem to have been, to a certain extent, part of this wake-up call to realize it's, that it's real. But yeah, very, very powerful story.
I don't think the public can truly ever be fully prepared for full disclosure. So I feel like it should just happen. Like, what's stopping them from landing next door to the Sydney Opera House and just making a big spectacle of it so we can get on with it?
Well, some have said, why don't they land in the White House? And the answer to that is because they'll be shot at. I think that at some point they need to do something pretty dramatic. There's always going to be, and I've always made this comment, that there's always going to be 10%, if a UFO, 10% of people, if a UFO landed on their front lawn, they'd call it a fire engine, because they just can't handle the reality. And there will be those that will go into completely denial and whatever. But that's fair enough. I mean, if you and I can take on board this, even though we weren't necessarily brought up to know it was a reality and what have you, if we can come to terms with it, then I think the capacity of the human is able to do exactly the same. But there'll always be those, whether it's through religion, through their own scientific beliefs or archaeological beliefs, that struggle with that. But, isn't life about that? It's about learning to expand your horizons, and some will do it better than others.
Well, one of your books is called The New Human. What are some of the other titles that you have?
Well, Awakening was my first book, and the reason I wrote Awakening, How Extraterrestrial Contact Can Transform Your Life, is because that's what I was seeing. And it was asking, it writes about how do you know it's real? What do you do with the fear? What if your children are having experiences? What do you do if your psychic abilities expand? All those kind of questions that I got asked time and time and time again. What is hypnosis? How do you get information that way? What's the difference between a UFO researcher and a therapist? This kind of thing. But the second one was more about the stories. It was more and more about the stories, not just, there were some stories and case studies in the first book, but it was about the stories that the children were saying, as well as the adults, about their experiences and how they understood these beings and how they understood reality and their connection to other intelligences.
Where should people go to find out more about your books?
Well, they're available through most of the bookstores and what have you. Just have to order them. If you're in Australia, you can get it directly from me and have it signed by me, or in New Zealand. But they're with Ingram and all the bookstores. You just have to order it, and it's easy enough to do so. I've just heard that Japan is publishing The New Human very shortly, which is really great. They've already published Awakening. So that's another one, for those that live in other cultures and what have you. So just Google or go to Amazon. Any of those will you can get the books from there.
Are you still practicing hypnotherapy?
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm not allowed to retire yet. And the great thing is, because we have the internet, I can do hypnosis over Zoom. So it's not a problem where whatever the location is, as long as they can speak English, I can work with them in hypnosis or do a session with them. And that's been really useful because I'm a bit out on a limb here. Not everybody can get to Agnes Water, but I do hypnosis, whether it's in Brazil, US, England, Europe, Scandinavia. Yeah, they just need to be able to speak English.
And it's effective? It works through Zoom?
It's been no problem whatsoever. Absolutely no problem. Once, the main thing for most of this is, as long as they feel safe and they trust you and have confidence in you, it isn't actually an issue at all.
What else do you got going on that you want people to know about?
Oh, I think we've covered a fair bit of ground here, Jeff, to be quite honest. Just to say that, I do sessions, not only hypnosis to find answers if that's what they're seeking, but also to help those that want to open up more of their multidimensional awareness. I help with that over Zoom as well, and it's not a problem. So if somebody's already sensing presences or seeing, feeling energies or seeing balls of light, or having experiences where they feel that it's changing their awareness and want to have more confidence in that, they were very welcome to get in touch and see if it's some way that I can help them expand on that.
Before we finish up, can you leave us with a last positive message?
Absolutely. And what I'd like to say is what I've said many, many times, and I just want to reiterate it. We are having an amazing time. We're in an amazing time on this planet right now. A time where people are waking up to what's really going on, finding out who they are and what they are. And all I can say is you've chosen a particularly fascinating time in human history to be part of it. And the reason that you're part of it is because for most of you, you've got a mission or a purpose. Find out what that is and be that person that you know yourself to be, and to trust your intuition, trust your resonance to truth, and trust who you are, because there are the souls that are being incarnated now and have been over the last 50 to 100 years have come in to be part of this amazing awakening of humanity. And all I can say from an Aussie point of view, good on you, mates. Keep going, because we've got some amazing times ahead.
Mary, thank you for your message, and thank you for being my guest again.
Jeff, it's been an absolute pleasure, and thank you for doing all that you're doing to spread the word and to help people understand more of who they are.
You're welcome. Thanks for watching the JeffMara podcast. I really appreciate you. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. And if you do, there are loyalty badges and other perks depending on your level of membership. All you need to do is click the join button underneath the video to find out more. Thank you for your support.